Before we get started, I'm going to send everyone a copy through the chat of our updated agenda. And hang on, just want to see who joined us. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I've just sent that. So I want to ask permission. I made some slight adjustments or changes to the agenda. And so I need to ask everyone's permission to make those as that they're different from what was warned. And then in this updated agenda are additional links, and all of that I want you to be able to access during the meeting, but that'll also be part of the minutes so that anyone who's not here can access the materials as well. So the changes that I made, I added under updates after social and emotional support, the link for social and emotional support in MAUSD. I added a link to an update from Superintendent Reen to the board. So that's a change. And then I also added, I initially had some broad questions under discussion for our engagement priorities. And then we had our board meeting last week where we, this committee was asked to focus on two particular things: one, school advisory councils, and two, getting input into the budget building process from the community. And so with your permission, I would like to add those two items and then the supporting documents. So I don't know, do I need to take a vote on that? Okay, so if everybody's cool with that, just give me a thumbs up and then we'll move forward. Okay. Great. And so for folks that are visiting, I just see a couple of people that aren't here with us usually. We're glad you're here, and we do have a public comment section. And then what we'll do is move into discussion with the committee members, and that includes several community members and then our board reps. But we'll have another public comment session at the end. So I do just ask during public comment if you, well, first, if everybody can stay muted until we get to that point, but during public comment, if you could please be sure to state your name and your town, that would be great. And to please, yeah, share your thoughts with us in a respectful way. So if you want to raise your virtual hand, and again, if everyone could mute, let's see, Allison, Dabika, I'm going to mute you. Okay, so raise your hand if you have a comment for the public comment section, your virtual hand, and I'll call on you as I see you. I don't think I see any hands right now. Let me just look. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we'll come back to public comment at the end of the meeting. So now I'd like board rep to make a motion to approve our minutes from our last meeting, which was in September. We did not meet in October. So if I could have a motion to approve the minutes from September.
So moved, Rob.
Thank you. And can I have a second?
I'll second Krista, but I was not at the meeting.
Okay.
But I think I approve. I just won't vote.
Okay, great. All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye or raise your hand. Okay, great. And the minutes are approved, and it looks like Liz has just joined us. Hey, Liz. Don jotted down the initial minutes, and if you are, I can't see you, but I'm scrolling through. There you are. Are you able to do minutes for us from this point forward?
Yep, I've got the minutes up, and
Great.
I've gotten started as well. So thank you.
Awesome.
Sorry for being late.
No worries. Okay. Okay, great. So for those just joining us, we added a few things to our agenda, but what we'll do now is go through some updates. What I'd really like to do is not necessarily go through each one, but just sort of, you know, in the interest of time, just share that these are some materials that were provided to the board and some to the community. So two relate to the social and emotional support topic. One relates to the ongoing work with Nate Levinson, and one relates to the work of the Merger Study Committee. I might resend that link for folks that just joined who might not be able to see that if they don't have their chat, the agenda in the chat. But if you open that, you can open up those documents. So I will just pause and see if any committee members have any comments or questions about any of the information shared there. And if I don't see you raising your hand or putting your virtual hand up, feel free to just unmute. We're a small enough group.
Krista, I have a quick question about the work with Nate.
Mhm.
What is the process for that? Does he meet with the board outside of the board meetings? Or is it more of an email exchange? I'm just wondering how the board communicates with Nate around the proposal process.
Yep. So and I'm just want to see if this is in our link. So we have set meetings, check-in meetings with Nate, but Patrick, Don, and myself, and Nate and Carla, who's another member of his team, meet at least probably once a month, sometimes twice a month. And then he comes to specific board meetings. So he's sort of updating us on his progress. We share those reports back out with the full board. But then there are set times where he's come to full board meetings. So he came to our retreat. I can't remember if he's come since then, but then he's scheduled to come back to share the criteria that were developed in the community input committee work. Then he will be coming back to the full board with the report that they've put together. So really when he's sharing out like summative information or reports, that's to the full board. Those updates in between are to the smaller group.
Okay, great, thanks. And are his full reports available to the public? Can people see those?
Yeah, and we don't have any yet. And so
okay.
what he came to the retreat with was one slide deck that I think we did share out at a board meeting after that was talking about all the varying perspectives of information on different pieces of information out there, and that their work was to try to get their arms around that. But there's nothing concrete yet. So that's, I think, the first thing we'll hear from him is that report on the criteria that the community input committee worked on.
Okay, great.
And I think that's coming on our I'm looking at November 30th board meeting.
If the CIC.
Yes, if the CIC, I think, was meeting tonight, actually it was a conflict with this meeting. They finished their work, that he will come to the board on that date, the 30th, to share the outcomes of that. And then, yes, absolutely, anything that he shares with us, we will for sure want to get out to the community. Coco, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I think I read somewhere that the community input committee would be recorded and those meetings could be watched.
Yes, that's true.
Available yet?
That is a really good point, and that's a great question. And we have the recordings. Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I'm trying to remember if they got put up on the website, but if they didn't, then that's...
I haven't seen them on the website, at least from where I've looked for them.
Yep.
But I think it would be important to share those. Yep,
I think that's a really good point, and I think it got buried in my email list, but I'm making a note to see if we can't get those up. And they'll probably go, there's a facilities planning section of the website, so I think they'll just go right there. There were 2 meetings so far. Tonight would be the 3rd, and it might take a few days for the link to come through for that recording, but for sure the first 2 can go up.
Have those recordings been shared with board members yet and just not with the public? Or they just haven't been circulated?
Steve's shaking his head. I think not. I think they're just sort of sitting in our inbox or my inbox. So yeah, I think that's a great idea to make sure those get up there.
Like an unwrapped gift.
That's right. I think
more Zoom meetings to watch.
I was going to say, I think, yeah, I mean, I think, like, to be honest, that's probably why it's still sitting in my inbox, is because I know I kept thinking, I really want to watch these. And clearly I haven't.
It's the perfect accompaniment to a big load of laundry.
Exactly. But thank you for mentioning that, and we'll get those up, and that will
in place of a sleeping pill.
I hope not. And I actually think that that work is going to be really great to hear more about, but via Zoom might not be as exciting. Okay, so any other questions about the updates that were shared? Okay, I don't see any hands, so we'll move on. So again, what we were originally going to do is sort of talk broadly about our engagement priorities, because at the board meeting on our most recent board meeting, which was last Tuesday, we had school advisory councils on the agenda. I wanted to get that in front of this group as well. The board had some preliminary conversation about it, and it was part of a very long meeting, and I think more discussion is definitely needed. But this group includes several board members, and I think it's a great place for us to continue some of that conversation and bring our thoughts back to the full board. So Steve Rooney was kind enough to join us tonight because he did a really nice job with the full board, sort of sketching out the thinking around what these advisory councils could look like. And Nancy Cornell provided some great feedback, and she and Steve went back and forth on some different points. So I'd like to turn it over to Steve to sort of walk us through some of that info. And Nancy, if you want to chime in at any point, feel free. And then what I'd really love to do is just have some conversation about what people think about this.
Maybe I could just, with a little bit more context, the work that Steve did was back in 2018. And my comments were from then too, and his comments on my comments were from then too. But going back a little bit before that, when the Act 46 Study Committee was meeting and deciding on articles of agreement, one of the articles of agreement, I think it's number 15. It's not one that appeared on the ballot, but it was one that was approved by the committee and also by I guess it was the state board when they reviewed the articles of agreement that were proposed, was about school advisory councils. And it simply is an article that says that the new school district board may establish school advisory councils in the new district. And one of the reasons that we were that many of us on that Act 46 Study Committee felt that this was important is that it seemed to us, especially that the combination of consolidating from multiple boards to one board, the combination between that and policy governance ran the risk of really creating some limitations on communication between the new board, the superintendent, and our communities, and that school advisory councils might be a way to make sure that there was really good communication moving back and forth between communities in relation to schools and the school administration and the board. So that's where the idea came from.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Nancy.
and that's a very good overview of the real intent behind this. What was distributed, and you've seen, and I can actually, I don't know if it would help to share my screen, Krista. I don't know if I can do that.
Sorry, trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, I think I can give you permission to do that. Actually, I'm going to make you host, and then you can do it. Okay.
Sure.
All right, see if that works.
Yep. All right. You able to see the screen?
Yes.
Right. So the work that I did here and was distributed before the meeting, both to create this sort of diagram and some notes to go along with it, really were just an attempt to try to kickstart a framework for the discussion. And this was based upon a board retreat that we had back in the summer of 2018, where we talked about the concept of advisory councils, and we talked about, Patrick had the VSBA come in and talk about best practices that they had seen around the country for this kind of participation. Patrick noted a few things that he wanted to be able to have cleared up if we decided to go down this road, just in terms of logistics. How do we set boundaries on conversations? How do we make sure people know that they've been heard? How are people accountable to whatever system we've set up here? And I sort of took a lot of those different logistical questions and tried to at least imagine a framework that would address all of them in sort of what I would call a Kickstarter conversation, where I basically said, okay, how are we going to make up each of these boards? And I said, okay, we'll do it this way. And this is just me sort of saying, here's how things could work. And informed by an earlier version of this that Caleb Elder did, with some sample questions or sample agendas that each of the different kinds of groups might be asked to participate in. And the goal of this diagram and the notes that go with it and the conversations with Nancy really are just the start of a conversation, and for folks to sort of think about each of these different issues and say, okay, yes, we do need to handle how we're going to handle the feedback loop here, and how we're going to understand what's on everybody's agendas and whether issues have been handled, and how are we going to do that? I can see how we might do it in this particular scheme. Is that the way we really want to do it, or do we want to do it some other way? But it kind of lets you see how the framework might work, and then allows you to sort of, folks to have a conversation about how they really do want it to work. And as Nancy's pointed out in our conversation and in other conversations I've had with her, that this is a very sort of rigid, this appears to be a very rigid sort of system here, but it's really just a starting point. And it could be that this is what is used to kind of get the ball rolling. And then each of these groups, frankly, could be more organically developed over time. For instance, the Mount Abe, there is proposed in this system an advisory group at Mount Abe, and that advisory group came about on its own. It's already there, the community council, and they would, I could envision them just plugging right into this system. So that also could frankly happen at each of the local schools. We could, this could be passed around. They could say, here's kind of an idea of how you could form, but there isn't necessarily a legal structure here, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be followed in some sort of legal fashion, depending on how the board wants to, what kind of, sideboards the board wants to put on this activity. So and I think one of the benefits of this, of advisory councils and sort of outside a group of people meeting outside of the board policy governance structure, is that, conversations can be more informal. They can be less Robert's rules and public comment periods, and more just a general, a more relaxed conversational kind of interchange between folks. And that the key thing that I think comes out of this is that there is a feedback loop from the top to the bottom. The diagram, basically, I put it together for two reasons. One, I hadn't found anywhere in the website for the district or in any of the other documents that there was any kind of a diagram that just kind of outlined basically how the district is organized right now under Act 46, who's responsible for what. And it also kind of pinpoints exactly what these advisory councils wouldn't be responsible for. I mean, the center column is really the structure of the organized legal entity, and the advisory councils are either side of that, and they're less formal and less restricted, frankly, by the rules and regulations. So it was a way to sort of outline for folks what the center, the basic structural organization looks like, and then how the advisory councils might feed into that system. Who's responsible for an agenda? How is that agenda broadcast to the public? How is it monitored by either the superintendent or by the board? And how do we know that issues that are important have been addressed? Those are some of the things that we want. Those are some of the important things I think we really want to get out of this. Also, a key thing to point out is that this organizational chart sort of anticipates that there might be local issues, and you can see those local issues. There's a sort of some examples here on the left of what local issues might look like that don't necessarily impact the district. They're opportunities and coordination things that really are school specific. Not to say that these local groups couldn't talk about district issues, but in that process of discussing those things, anything that came out of those discussions might be pushed and sent over to a district-wide conversation with a district group, just so that opportunity isn't missed on the district level, and also for different local councils to be able to share back and forth, things that they think might affect more than one school. Also at the local level, there might be local groups that want to plug in, mentoring groups, volunteer groups, the PTO for that school. And that gives them a chance to sort of also comment on what's going on at the local level. The corresponding district group might have a district-wide group that wants to plug in, Five-Town Community Forum. Some other folks might want to have a seat or a voice in a council format that isn't so formal and strict, and that would give them an opportunity to plug in at a district-wide conversation level. So when some of these bubbles here filter or reassign, it's basically that the local issues, we might consider those to be more the means and not the ends necessarily, although it doesn't restrict these folks from talking about the ends. But here you could dive right into the means, and those means could be monitored by the principal and then by the superintendent and their staff. And that would allow for a feedback loop to go on about means. On the district-wide level, there might be more of an ends agenda, and that could be monitored by the board. It could be participated directly in by some board membership, and also by monitoring by the board being able to monitor that agenda.
Steve, could you just say quickly the difference between means and ends for folks that might not?
Sure. So the current
appreciate that distinction.
So the current legal setup basically has the board setting the ends expectations and setting limitations on how the superintendent and their staff can accomplish those ends. Outside of those boundaries, outside of those goals and those boundaries, we essentially allow the superintendent and their staff to accomplish their mission by whatever means they find to be the most advantageous to students and to the taxpayers, and however, basically trying to come up with their own professional judgment on how to execute what the board desires. So the ends is really, the final result, and if you go onto the website, you can find our ends policy, and there's a specific list of things that we want, our students to come out of their educational experience understanding and moving on with. And we give the superintendent basically only a set of limitations on things that they can't do that are illegal or unethical or or would put the organization at risk. We outline what those things are, but essentially the superintendent has control over the means, and the board tries to stay out of diving into the means and really dealing with the means. And that tends to be a point of contention sometimes for new members and even existing members, especially when there's an issue that might bear a little closer scrutiny. But in general, we're trying to stay out of the professional's way of doing the professional's work, and that's the means, and then the ends really is the board is responsible for ensuring that the ends are really accomplished by monitoring the end results.
Great, thank you.
So just quickly, the second page is really, again, just here are how the thing could be kickstarted, and addressing a few issues like, are you going to have a paid secretary? Are you going to provide childcare? Are you going to, how are you going to start the year? How are you going to elect your members? And it's not that these things have to be done the way that they're outlined here. It's just that each of these things does need to be thought about in some fashion. So that's it.
Steve, do you mind keeping your screen sharing for a minute or a couple of minutes, actually?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much for running through all of that. And what I want to do to help guide our conversation about all this, it's a lot to digest for sure. And this isn't the last time we're going to talk about it. But yeah, if you could go to that first slide with the diagrams, I guess maybe first I'd like to just find out what clarifying questions you might have about the information that Steve provided. And then maybe we could talk about your reactions to it. So it's hard for me to see. I can sort of scroll up and down, but if folks want to just unmute if you have any specific questions for Steve, or things you don't quite understand, go ahead and just unmute and ask.
I have a question about, is this something that the board has to vote on? I'm trying to understand how this sort of happens. I thought I heard Steve say it sort of happens organically, but is it something that the board decides that they want to have each of the schools develop advisory councils, and then the formation of these councils happens at the board level, or it happens at the local level? That piece I'm unclear on.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a very good question. I'm not sure that the board actually has to authorize these things. I think that the board, it would be helpful for the board to encourage this to happen and to support whatever framework and resources folks might need to get started. For instance, we're suggesting the principals attend the local advisory council meetings. That's directly requesting district resources, and that might need to have some board input. But outside of that, as I said, the Mount Aid Council developed on their own. It wasn't necessarily that the board encouraged it once they started forming, but it wasn't something that we legally had to all vote on for it to happen.
And I think I would just add to that if the board takes ownership of it, that can confine and restrain these councils. Just by nature of us being a public body, we have to follow lots of rules and regulations that I think could, there's a feeling that could really stymie the flexibility of these groups. So I think it's a really good question and one we need to talk a little bit more about. But I think Steve's right that it would be probably something the board would recommend and see as a really good avenue and be open to hearing from as part of our way to connect with our stakeholders. And then we might see that there's a need for this feedback loop. But other than that, be a little more hands-off with what exactly it might look like at each school, or prescribing very specifically how it needed to operate.
Right.
Sounds like Coco has her hand up. You want to go
I do,
ahead?
yeah. Thanks for the visual, Steve. Are any school districts in Addison County doing community council models, or has anybody spoken with schools that have this, or spoken with districts, sorry, that have been using this model and got any feedback about how that's been going?
This just sort of reemerged as something we wanted to focus on just recently. And this, like I said, this work was done back in 2018. One of the first things we did was hear from the VSBA what they've heard around the state and around the country about this sort of activity. And frankly, I can't recall that they had much in the way of examples in Vermont. It sounded like they were looking at things that were, and this is some old recollection on my part, whether they had found much of this going on. I think Act 46 was new for everybody at the time that we were even talking about this. There were several districts that still hadn't even, been through the process. And I can see Nancy wants to feed into this. Go right ahead, Nancy.
Thanks. There may be, I did at the time talk with a superintendent up in the Northeast Kingdom, and who had started school advisory councils, I believe, in the wake of consolidation, but my memory of this is a little bit fuzzy. But she had a great, as I recall, she had a great, had encouraged that to happen, and had established them in the schools where she was superintendent. Her name is Jen Batsa-Jorns, and I don't quite recall. I have this. I can figure out where she's from. She's someplace up in the Northeast Kingdom. So she was having quite a lot of success with them, and I think that she established them in the wake of school consolidation in her school district. And there may be more, but I do know of that one.
Yeah, it might be worth asking the VSBA for an update. Maybe they have more information as well on what's gone on recently in that regard.
I feel like that could be really helpful in thinking about this model and just, getting some feedback from districts that have used it or are using it.
Sure.
Her school district is Kingdom East, up in the Northeast Kingdom.
Thanks, Nancy. My sense was that you would know something about that. So really, it was a question to you.
I also definitely want to hear what people think about this idea, but I want to make sure see if there's any other clarifying questions. I don't see any hands right now. So what we heard.
Sorry, Krista, I just have one clarifying question, and I'm sorry if it's already been presented, but I heard you say that Mount Abe has a school council, and I'd just love to know how that's been going in terms of working with the board, especially in light of the conversations that have been happening over the last few months about the climate at Mount Abe and safety concerns. So has that facilitated some more communication and clear channels, or?
So I can speak to that a little bit. I'm the board rep to the community council, and I think I've been the rep for two years now. Well, let's see, I started the year before COVID, and they were really like rebuilding their presence at Mount Abe. I think they started as part of like a democratic school model. And they had been going for a while, then sort of they wax and wane based on student and staff interest and availability. So they were going through a rebuilding period. They had a lot of great interest and participation. We had 2 students who were on community council who were representatives to the school board, who attended board meetings regularly, and they would update the board and on their work. And then the board would also invite feedback from them and the full community council. They were really helpful when this committee did a lot of work in 2019 with engaging with the community, and getting a lot of student participation. They were pretty active during COVID. You had a lot of really good Zoom meetings around a variety of topics, and their work spans from everything from what can we do to beautify the physical space of the building, what new clubs and organizations are students interested, and to heavier topics like the raising of the Black Lives Matter flag. This year, they are having a really hard time getting students, staff, and community members to participate. And, I think there's just a lot of reasons for that. So they do, they're rebuilding again. We do have a board rep who will start coming to meetings in November, or at the end of the month. So there's a lot of potential there, and the way that plays out, I think, really varies depending on who the folks are that are sitting on the council, what they're focused on at any particular time. But I've always really been excited to tap into that group so that we have student voice as much as possible. And it can be hard to get that. And that's a way to connect with student leaders that's kind of built in already. And a way for us to hear more regularly what they think about things.
Krista, Sandy, is community council considered open meetings? It's not, is it? It's a separate, sort of the school runs the community council. We just have a board rep that goes, and then
Correct.
Okay.
Right. They have representatives from, their goal is to have at least one representative from every town. So if you're a community member that wants a chance to spend a little time getting to know Mount Abe, it's a great opportunity. They really need folks. They try to get representatives from every academic department and representatives from every class year, and then a board representative. So yeah.
Do they have a mission statement that's sort of separate that they put together or anything like that?
They have a constitution, and I think probably embedded in that is their mission statement. I think it's really built on that sort of democratic school process, giving students, especially high school students, more agency over what happens in the building. And I'll just add one thing that was pretty cool last year was that we designated a portion of the budget to a significant, I think it was $10,000 of the budget for Mount Abe. That would have been part of capital improvement to Mount Abe anyway, but we gave this group the opportunity to decide how those funds would be spent. And they spent several meetings figuring out how to survey students, how to gather input, how to synthesize that input, research the different options. And they wound up purchasing more outdoor seating, which has been awesome for lots of reasons, COVID related and otherwise. But so, yeah, there's a lot of potential there. To do different, to work with folks in different ways. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Just a clarifying question, I guess. Would these councils, and maybe I missed it, I've been in and out today, but directly report to the board, or does it get filtered through? I guess my question is, and this is something that's popped in my head, I think the board should have actually a communication calendar along with our work calendar, but would there just be a time for this group to directly report to the board? It's great that Mount Abe has that community council, and I know they came to us at least one time last year. But if we put it on the, every, second meeting, we're going to hear from our community councils or the Mount Abe. And just because I don't remember if I've heard from the Mount Abe Community Council in a long time. Yeah,
and I think that's a good question, comment, or suggestion to bring to the whole board that we find a way, we discuss whether we want to find a way to weave these groups into our regular, like I think I said before, that this, it could be a really good way for us to hear from our stakeholders.
I think that's a great idea, this sort of communication calendar that works into the work plan, and it could coordinate with the different policies that we're monitoring, like in advance, because it's just a good reminder of here are our connections and linkages to the community, and we're actually getting input in after already reaching out. I like that idea, Rob, because it helps just reminds us what we have to do. It's hard with all the business we have. I did have a clarification question about the chart that's sort of similar to Rob's. I was looking at the local advisory council and the district advisory council, and I noticed that in both the makeups of those council, other than the board chair in the district one, there isn't really a board member involved in the local towns. And I sometimes wonder if we set up like 5 town local, advisory councils, if one of the board members from that community would be, part of that, because that could be also part of the reporting process, because it sounds like we can do that without turning it into like open meeting requirement type of thing, but yet at the same time be able to be that connection to be able to report, what's been happening.
Can you guys hear me? Because I'm unmuted, I think. Am I unmuted, Sandy? Okay.
Yeah, I think I clicked your screen by mistake there, Krista. That's why you got that
okay.
message.
I was just going to say, like, building off that, Sandy, my experience with community council has been great in that respect, that I really like to get that on the ground perspective of what's happening at Mount Abe. And I think it's hugely informative. So if that's a model we're looking at, my experience has been that it's very helpful to have a board member at the table.
I think it's just great because then we have in mind the bigger picture, but also can help inform the rest of the board about what's happening in each town. So I think I don't know if that's come up before, Steve, about adding, members to some of these.
I think, like I said, this is just a first blush at it. And I think I was trying to avoid putting any more work on board members and giving other folks that hadn't had a chance to talk, more of a voice. The whole idea of the reporting here was that on the local level, there'd be an agenda that the principals would basically be in charge of, and how they would filter or reassign any issues. And all the agendas on both of these ends would be public. They'd be web-based. You'd be able to see them anytime you wanted to see what the discussions were and what was old business, new business, what was being raised to a higher level of conversation. And so the whole idea here is for the feedback loop to be very transparent and very strong, whether that involves, adding board members to these groups or not. And again, I think that could be a decision that the local group makes on their own, depending on their personal desires as a group. Nancy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Steve and I have talked a lot about this, bringing back those conversations to remember. It's making me remember those conversations a lot, Steve, and to appreciate them. I mean, I think it's such an interesting question and challenge to think about how could one make this happen, and how could it be, as Steve said, as organic as possible. I mean, and what that's going to look like in every town is probably going to be somewhat different. I mean, I don't picture these as elected positions. I picture, at least in our town, I think what we would try to do is put some basics together and then put the call out and say, basically who would like to come along on this adventure. And I think the success depends for the most part really on good facilitation, skillful facilitation. We certainly have principals who have those skills. I don't know if all the principals do, but I imagine that they do. But I think with good facilitation and clear guidelines around, this is advisory. This isn't a group that makes decisions. It's a group that talks about issues, that decides on their agenda, and conveys information out and requests information in. In our town, I imagine that our school board members might want to come to meetings, and there might be times that the group would request that they come because we have questions that board members could help us with. But I don't know that it would be a requirement. On the other hand, board members are community members too. And I imagine that there would probably be a core group that meets, that attends all the time. And then depending on what the agenda is, other people would be welcome. I don't think it has to be regimented. I think, and it's important for it to be organic.
Yeah, these lists of participants really could just be a suggestion. Here's an example of the kind of breadth of the folks we would like to participate. And as I think we were talking about before, it can be difficult to get anybody to participate. So I don't think we necessarily want to restrict it up front. I think we want to encourage the folks who are willing to put in the time to come in and put in the time.
I see Kim's hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for Steve and Nancy. Given that this is 3 years old, I'm just curious, in looking at this, is there anything on here, knowing what you know sort of about how things work in the district and how our particular district is set up, that you would change, that would be different? Because this seems pretty to me, from the outside, this seems like a pretty well thought out structure, but I'm just wondering about those of you who are more ingrained in it, if there's anything on here that you think, 3 years ago, maybe that would have worked, but that's something we have to rethink.
I'll let Nancy speak to this too, but my first reaction to that is that I've only seen more and more of the need of it. Not that it's obsolete or should be thrown out. Obviously, it's the first blush. It needs work just to get going, and it could be relaxed quite a bit. But it's, the feedback loop is missing, and that's what we really need. And the other thing that I was suggesting at our board meeting the other day was that even though these aren't legal structures, they can be occasionally. We can charge them with something. The board has a lot on its plate. We could use a group of people who want to look into a particular issue and have them report back to the board with a recommendation. So we could lighten our load a bit if these groups were robust enough. We could pick, a particular topic we need some help with and ask them to lend a hand.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's part of the conversation that we had at the 5-Town Learning Network. I think it was 5 years ago, about in what ways could the community actually help the board? And so I'm glad to hear you say that. And this was really well thought out. And thank you for getting this started, restarted. Probably is a better way to say it.
I would say that when Steve built this, he was responding to a lot of questions that had come up about what would this be like. And he built a graphic that sort of, I think of it as, Steve is trying to explain how the universe works. And I think that if we were thinking about how to get local, first of all, I would say, I'm not sure there's a need for district advisory councils. There might be there might be times when the board would like to have a chat with members of the local advisory councils and pull those people in. But I'm not sure, given all of the board's other work, I'm not sure that they need a separate district advisory council. But in terms of if we were helping to get something like this going in each town, I think we might take the left side of this graphic and create a graphic that really is just about that. Because when you look at it from the whole universe perspective, it is helpful to have a big view, but it may scare the heck out of people to see so many different pieces and parts just graphically. So I think focusing in on how might we get this going. How does the board want to sanction it? I mean, I don't think we want the board to run it or even put money into it. I do think it needs board sanction, and I think that, and encouragement. I think that will be very helpful. I've often thought, well, maybe we just go ahead and do this without the board saying anything. But I think that encouragement and sanction from the board is really important for it to work.
Yeah, I think especially if we're going to, primarily on the principal front, just if we're going to ask those folks to spend more time outside of their normal hours, that we provide some kind of understanding about that from the board level. So,
well, and I do think if we were going to move forward on this, it would be really important to involve the principals in talking about it.
Absolutely.
and planning for it, and thinking about what would work in their communities, because they know so much about that and would be so helpful in figuring it out.
Yep.
Is that something that we can, I'm trying to think the next step to make that happen, because I was being mindful of board role, superintendent role, principals, staff, because this does definitely involve that process. So I'm wondering if even just starting with a meeting with superintendent, principals, maybe someone from our group to say, let's talk about how we can make this actually start. Like, how does this work for everyone? Like, can we initiate that kind of meeting? Keeping in mind that we have a lot of business at hand lately, but when the time is right, I can see having that sort of administrator conversation with the principals, including the superintendent, since he's responsible, for being the one that says, he's the one that actually can tell the principal, this is what I would like you to do. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I'll just chime in and say, process-wise, what I imagined is that, I'm taking lots of notes on this feedback, which this feedback is so helpful, especially because the full board does have a lot on our plate. But what I imagined was that I would synthesize this so that we can share these recommendations with the full board. So the full group has a chance to talk about it again, as we said we would do that at our next meeting. And then decide which of those recommendations we want to pursue. So we can include in there, this group thinks it's important to get feedback on this structure from principals. This group thinks it's important to find a way for the board to hear regularly from the councils, or what, I'm going to try to capture all these notes. And then it will go back to the full board to sort of figure out what the next step is. But
I think we need to hear from folks what kind of reason. I mean, I know Nancy would prefer we didn't spend any money on this, but just in terms of what resources we might need to help get it started. Like if we're going to develop some kind of an agenda thing that we can all see visually, who's setting up a website, who's going to put the technical end of it together for folks to have a tool to communicate properly. Those things may be simple, they may be complex, but somebody's going to need to dive into those, and maybe there's a volunteer who wants to do that, but I think it should be hosted with district resources. I think that would be best just for longevity and maintenance. And then, are there any other resources that we need to just either say yes or no to? in the formation.
Another piece of this that will be the key to making it work is that there needs to be a common understanding across local advisory councils about what they are and what they can and should do and what they aren't. I hate to use the word guardrail, but I think people who are part of these groups will need will need some training, and it needs to be pretty common. Not a whole lot of it, nothing heavy-handed, but enough so that certainly the superintendent can feel, and the board can feel that these groups understand that they're advisory and that they're not there to talk about complaints about personnel. That there's some rules and beyond that, that there's skillful facilitation. There's always a clear agenda. There's always someone convening the group and helping it move along. It starts on time, it ends on time. Pretty basic stuff, but very important for the success of the effort.
And there's a danger without that folks could get all fired up to do this and then feel like they're not being heard, but they might be actually talking about the wrong things, so we don't want that to happen. We don't want them to be frustrated with what they're talking about and the kind of feedback they're providing when it may just unfortunately be inappropriate.
Well, I think, as Nancy said too, that good facilitation could help with that. And it's exciting. I like, and I agree, Nancy, that was one of the things I thought about, was whether the DAC was necessary at this point, and if getting it started with just the local advisory councils, and if it felt like there needed to be this other layer. I hate for it to have too many layers. So have something that's direct from the local schools to the superintendent, to the school board, and really focusing on what that feedback loop looks like, I think will be a big chunk of the work to flush this out.
I do want to say some of it isn't about feedback. Some of it's going to be about people just needing to have conversation about the math curriculum, or what are kids, great things that are happening at the school. I mean, a way to plug in on a local level to what's going on in the school. And inevitably there will be ideas and concerns that come from those conversations, and who will convey them, and who do they convey them to? It might be the principal's role in a group, but it might be someone else in the group who takes on that role.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's things that these groups could actually accomplish. I mean, if the principal could say, hey, look, there's this big event coming up with a bunch of volunteers, and we need somebody to help coordinate it, and this group might help, or it might say, hey, look, I know these folks can work on it, and I'll be willing to contact them. And so I think there are some things that they could actually accomplish even as an advisory group that don't necessarily mean that they're creating policy or anything.
And I love the piece in here about helping to coordinate mentors from the community, because it feels like a natural aspect of work between the principal, the staff, the parents, and community members to help pull that together, as opposed to leaving that to one person in the building that may even not live in the community, trying to find community mentors from inside the school. So I love that aspect of this plan as well.
I hope you don't mind, Allison DeBica just sent me a note, which I think is great. I was actually going to see, since we have a small group, I'd love to just, there's a couple of visitors here. I just love to, and we're doing great with time. So I just love to offer an opportunity for anyone who's not sort of officially on the committee, if you want to share your thoughts on how all this sounds. So yeah, I don't know, Allie, if you are comfortable sharing that, and if not, that's fine. I'll just make note of it.
Oh, no, I totally am.
Okay.
I really do love this idea. I think it will give people an opportunity to discuss and have conversation. And I liked the term organically, of course, with guidelines. But I would love for students to really be participants in this, and to have the BES as a reference, the student council, bring forth maybe a report once a month, or have those kids talk to other children, about what's happening, how they're feeling. That math test really stinks, we hate it, or whatever it is. But to give them a voice and to have them be heard, I think is really important in this type of council. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, and that's the model at Mount Abe is, students are really actively, they are the council, but I think it's a great idea to consider that for the elementary school councils as well. Anyone else want to chime in? Any last thoughts about, whether this serves the purpose that Nancy originally laid out, what you like, what you don't like about it? Anything else that we should capture to put together with all of the feedback that we're going to give to the full board?
I do have another comment that,
yeah,
because I'm very much keeping in mind all the monitoring reports that we're responsible for as a board. And I feel like, just like the report you gave us from the community council, it really gives more substance and texture to any of the monitoring reports that they're relevant for, to actually know what's happening. And I think it could be very also helpful ultimately for even the superintendent to receive this feedback and being able to report this out for ends. Like you really have like people expressing these or certain events or things or concerns that are happening in the schools, and I think they inform all the other kind of stats that you're looking at, like taking them in context. So I think that's always going to be the challenge for us as a board member. How do we really measure ends, right? Like the results, because it's so very broad, and I think we're constantly always trying to figure out how to measure that. But when we hear, what's happening at the local level in a more organic manner, you do get a better sense of how is it going? Like, how is the school progressing? And I could see this being a very rich place for information to help inform the board.
Krista, is it reasonable to set a goal for when, if the board, decides that they want to put some resources into this, when it could happen? Because it'd be really nice to kind of have an idea of what our goal is for establishing these and having them on the ground, by the first of the year, or after the holiday break or something like that. It's so that it doesn't kind of get kicked down the road. I'd love to see us be able to say our hope would be that we could get these up and running within a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at Don, who's sitting in central office with me. And I think that is a really great idea. And I think what we'll probably do, we definitely have momentum now around this. Whereas before, as Nancy can attest, we sort of talked about it and then we just didn't have momentum. And so I think there's a lot of interest in moving this along. And we have a couple of big things on our plate. And so I think we'll find time with the full board to look at the different other pieces and figure out what timeline makes the most sense. But
can I just say, I do think we have to involve principals in that question.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
I don't live in a school anymore, and but I do know that from everything I'm hearing and reading, this is as tricky a year as last year was in so many different ways. So I hope the principals will be excited about this idea, and I hope that they will have some control about the speed with which we try to get it up and running, if that's what the board intends to happen.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Mhm.
I would also say that it's incredibly refreshing to hear from the principals at the board meetings. And it would be, this would be another opportunity to give them more voice.
As Nate Levinson has said, they're among the most trusted people in our communities.
That's right. Okay. Well, I think we have some really great feedback to offer to the full group. And I've also invited other board members to make sure to submit stuff to me by the end of this week. So I have some time to pull it together before our next board meeting. So if anybody here thinks of anything that comes to them later or they didn't have a chance to say, please reach out to me. And I guess I get the last word on this because there was one thing I wanted to say, which I didn't get to. And it was about money and the resources. And the one thing I do want to keep in mind as we think about resources, and I'll capture this comment for our feedback to go to everybody. Resources from the board could help folks participate who might not otherwise be able to. And so I think with anything we do with engagement, it's really important for us to remember to make an effort to engage the folks that it's most difficult for them to participate. So a set budget for the council to use however they think most helpful to achieve that could be like a hands-off way to still offer that support. So okay, so I am going to, so thank you. Thanks so much, Steve, and you are welcome. If you could make me host again, that would be great. And then if you want to hang out, feel free. And if not, thanks for offering to walk us through all that hard work that you and Nancy did. So
yeah, hold on, I got to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, so if you hover over my name and participants, and then do you see the more button?
Yep.
And then you should be able to make me the host.
And with that, I'm going to head home.
All right. Have a great night.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is to talk about our upcoming budget development process. And on the agenda, it's titled Community Budget Forum. I'd like to just reframe it as in how can, input into the budget from the community. So in other words, the board is interested in finding a way to get input from the community as we build the budget. It might be a forum, but it doesn't need to be. So just that clarification. So we've done a couple of different things in the past. We almost always have a budget information session, but that's really sharing with people, the different components of the budget so that they're educated when they go to the polls about what they're voting for if they vote to support it. What we've tried to do more recently is have ways for the community to share their input on priorities for the budget before we get to the point where we as a board have decided what's going to go on the ballot. And our deadline for making that decision is end of January, I believe. So that means that getting feedback that is meaningful needs to happen pretty soon. So what I shared in the agenda was a presentation from 2018. That was the first time we worked with Sue McCormick, who was the engagement consultant we've worked with for a bunch of years, or we had worked with for a bunch of years. And that was like a meet and greet and, sort of casual conversations, and then really gathering priorities from folks around what was really important for us to invest in when we think about our school budget. Then I also shared, and so you can see the agenda and the presentation for that forum. Then I also shared an example from the Champlain Valley Supervisory District, just to show you what another nearby district is doing right now. And they are utilizing Thought Exchange, which is a platform that our district is considering getting as well. And it's a way to solicit feedback and ideas that build upon one another from community members around a given topic or around several questions. So they, I think they might have just closed their Thought Exchange, but it was open for a period of time. They asked some different questions about your priorities and for the district budget. And then, people could respond to other people's priorities. And all of that is collated by the system and then shared with their board. And then they were going to host a virtual forum. Not quite sure of the agenda of that forum. And then I also heard from the Virgin from Addison Northwest. What they're doing this year is just a Thought Exchange. So they also have that resource. They aren't having a forum, but they're going to have that venue for people to offer feedback into their priorities for the budget. We don't yet have Thought Exchange. We may have it in time to do this for our budget cycle. If we didn't, we might be able to utilize surveying or other tools. But what I'd like to just ask this group to think about is what they think would be most useful given this time and this moment and what people's capacity is and how best to get feedback from the community at this time. And then similar to the advisory council idea, I'm going to gather all that feedback and then we need to report back to the board and tell them this is our recommendation for how we proceed. So that's kind of the framework for this part of the conversation. Go ahead, Sandy.
Oh, thank you. I just didn't, what is Thought Exchange? Like, is it a program?
Yeah, it's a platform that you purchase and you have the ability to front load different questions. And then you provide people with a link and then folks would go on to the platform, identify themselves in whatever ways you set, and then respond to the prompts. And then your prompts immediately get aggregated with the other responses. And then you rate all of the responses. So it's like this way to build upon other people's feedback and generate ideas in the moment. And then they provide you with a really snappy, I haven't yet had a demo of it, and I'm hoping to do that as part of my role in the community engagement committee, because I think it would be great to have this kind of tool that then provides a really nice way to look at all the feedback you get.
Wow.
There's some of us, I think, on this call who spend time distilling other data we've collected, and it takes a long time. So if there's a tool that can do that for us, an electronic way for people to provide pretty quick feedback, it seems exciting, but we don't have it yet. So,
and you can use it not just for budget. It sounds like once you have the program.
Oh yeah, that's right.
For all kinds of.
That's right. For anything. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And timing, the second question I have is timing. So we're building our budget and then we're going to pretty much put a proposed budget by the end of November, December, or when do we usually?
We have to vote on it at the end of January.
Right. So we usually put something together. I can't by December, right?
Is that right, Don?
We're going to see iterations.
So all along, it's going to be sort of tweaked as we get more information in from the state on the financial pieces, which leads me to believe it can be tweaked as feedback is coming in as well. But when, Don, do we sort of have to close that?
The end of January.
End
of January is the hard deadline.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I noticed that October 31st was the end of the Thought. Forgot the name of the program already, but
Thought Exchange.
Yep, Thought Exchange. And I can see that they were trying to gather information earlier so that we could actually then work from that input as we're forming it. Obviously, I'm wondering, how quickly, gosh, if this program is really that good, it really would be a lovely community sort of connection tool. I'm curious to see if other people have actually, from other districts that we know, have actually used it, like what their impressions are.
Yeah, so Addison Northwest has used it as well, and Christina McMullen, who's their community engagement chair, I talked with her about it, and she loved it, and they're going to use it for this. But I think your question, like timing, we're admittedly behind the 8 ball already. So I think, I don't know, like if, I was talking to Katrina about when we might get trained on how to use it, and that probably won't be before Thanksgiving, or it would be probably right before Thanksgiving break. So it'd be a very fast turnaround. So it may not work for the budget.
Right. Might still be worthwhile trying though, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think part of the training is they recommend you have sort of a topic a timely topic that you can demo it with. So that might be the budget for us. I just want to make sure if we get feedback from people, we can get it in a time that's actually useful.
And sorry, last comment, as we're dealing with our proposals for the schools.
Yep.
This could be an incredible tool for trying to get community.
Correct.
I mean, I just trying to imagine how we're even going to pull that all together, and maybe this thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I like that.
Kim and then Nancy.
I was going to say that about the community proposal process, that this would be a great tool. I went on the Champlain Valley site and got in, I could look at the responses, but I couldn't, obviously I couldn't add anything, but the one thing that I was curious about was, it looked like they had 124 responses, which in a district with how many thousands of people, did they feel like that was a good response? It seemed pretty meager to me. But again, a lot of that depends on how well you can promote it, how you can encourage people to go and do it, and how you can incentivize people to be part of the process. So it just felt to me like not a very strong showing. So I didn't know if you had talked to anybody from Champlain, if they felt like they didn't have enough time, or they hadn't done a good enough job to get the word out, or they felt like 124 responses, we wouldn't have that many people come to a meeting. So maybe that is better than 15 people at a meeting. So
I think it's both of those things. It's probably not a great showing, and it's probably a better showing than they normally get. And also I think, this engagement work in an ideal world is about a lot of different media that you use to reach people, in-person, electronic, all of that. But I think it's a valid question. I have not gotten any feedback from their chair on whether they felt like, we knocked it out of the park or not. Yeah.
It did seem, and I don't know if I was in the whole platform, but it did seem that the topics were really limited to support staff pay, like that on that platform. And I don't know if what happens is, if somebody suggests something and then people are starting to comment on those, that the thinking gets narrow really quickly because people are responding to what other people are doing, or how much creative input is it generating. And maybe there needs to be some prompts or some guidelines, because it can kind of go down one rabbit hole very quickly. But other than that, it would be, like Sandy said, it would be interesting to see if there's other districts that use it. And I loved it, as a communications person. I just feel like that's such a powerful way to gather input. And it's the interface seemed really easy. It wasn't complicated. And I think that's important too. And then collating the data in real time. For the people
that's a gift.
that will need the data to do the job. That's huge. So.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy.
I haven't looked at the tool, but it does really sound very exciting. And the idea that it could be organized it's organized in such a way that people can build on each other's ideas is that's just huge and wonderful. I think like you said, Krista, no one platform is going to do all that needs to be done, but I think it's a great idea, and it's the fact that people can build on each other's ideas in a way that in a typical forum, it's hard to design it so that that happens unless you have a big chunk of time. That's pretty exciting. Even though it's late to be thinking about community input on the FY23 budget, I still think we should try, because even if we have a small turnout this time, I just think the fact of our asking is going to make a huge difference to our communities and to rebuilding trust. And we know that that's hugely needed. So I think that if we can get this platform and get the use of it underway, of course, part of the key will be how we ask the questions and what questions we ask. I mean, there's certainly an art to that as well as a science. So, but I think we should go for it.
What about other folks? What do other people think?
I was just going to say that I do like the idea of people having a voice in the formation of the budget. So whatever platform that you all decide, I think is important to put out there. And I liked what Nancy said about building that trust again. I think this is one way of doing it. So I like that idea. And I think many others will as well.
Thank
Thanks.
you. And what do people think about, so CVSD is doing the thought exchange and then a forum after. Wondering thoughts on that. And Coco, I see your hand up. So and Rob, why don't you guys, Coco and then Rob, and if you address what my question, great. And if you have something else to say, that's fine too.
Sure. Thanks, Krista. I absolutely agree with Nancy's point that it's essential, in the process of rebuilding trust to have these community discussions about the budget. One other question I had around that is, I recall reading that the ESSER 3 funds were supposed to have a community component to that discussion. And I remember reading something, maybe it was back in September, from Superintendent Reen, that there was going to be some community input for the ESSER 3 funds. And I just wondered, did I totally miss that? I feel like I'm pretty clued in, but I didn't see anything come about that ESSER 3 funds, and perhaps that could be a part of the budget discussion if it didn't seem too unwieldy, if that input hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Coco. Thank you. And no, I don't think anything's happened yet. Okay, thanks. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the whole conversation on the tool or whatever.
Thought exchange.
Yeah, it was thought exchange. That's putting my daughter to bed. Sounds great. I would still say 124 people is a great turnout, especially if those are the folks that actually might not show up to a meeting. But I think it's vital. I found, being a board member, the financials are just always overwhelming. But I've always thought it really interesting that this is taxpayer supported. We're a public entity, and in my time on the board, we haven't gone to the public and said, "Hey, how do you want your money spent?" We just say, "This is how much we're going to spend. What do you think?" And I think it's imperative, especially where our district is at the moment, that we engage not only with our community members, but with the people that it affects at the line of scrimmage. I think not having the teacher's voice at the table, or understanding how the teacher's voice is or isn't at the table in the current way that we go about building a budget. I just find that unfortunately lacking, or at least I don't have an understanding of how that occurs as a board member. Maybe it does, and again, that's another line of communication that the board needs to have a better understanding with the superintendent and or the principals in the different buildings. But yeah, just asking, I think the question is imperative, and whether that's through an online tool and then partnered with a Zoom / in-person meeting. I don't know how much influence it would have maybe on this year's budget, but I don't know if that's necessarily the biggest, not necessarily takeaway, but like the real intention. I think the real intention is to bring people back in, communicate, and just ask questions, because it's just another avenue that we can engage people. And but I also want to make sure that if people do bring up good points, that we're not just there nodding our heads and having it go in one ear, not the other, that there's some feedback loop on the back end that people can turn to and say, well, did you or did you not listen to what we had to say? And I think there's the front end, and then there's a backup follow-up also. I think about it in our current situation regarding the plan at BES with, hiring three people. My understanding is maybe that's with ESSER money, or maybe it's with, budget money. I'm not sure, but that loop needs to be connected and then closed, I think, on the back end. So I'm all for it as a board member and a community member. I'd tune in if I wasn't a board member and a community member, because it's such a huge expense when it comes to a personal pocketbook. And it'd be nice to know how that money is being spent without having to maybe dive into all the weeds. That can seem overwhelming.
That closing the loop that you're talking about is so important, I think, Robin. It makes me think that part of the process needs to be after the thought exchange and after the forum and after the budget is set, or as in the informational meeting about the budget, there needs to be some information back to the community about, this is what we heard and this is how we felt we could use it. This is where it's reflected in the budget. And certainly my dear father, when I was an adolescent, he used to say, "You're not listening to me." And I would say, "I'm listening, I'm just not agreeing." And there's so many of the things we might hear in community input, the board and the superintendent don't feel they can make actionable in the budget. But hopefully some of it they can, and being honest about what they were able to do and what the board wasn't able to do is an important way for people to know that at least they were listened to, even if it couldn't be agreed to.
And one really simple tool that I found really useful when building budgets and thinking ahead is, building a budget for a year and working with, this is a very small example, but working with the library board and the staff and the volunteers here to think about our priorities. And we're, of course, not able to fit all of that into each budget, that we bring to the voters at town meeting day, but we do keep careful track of how we can honor those priorities and honor those goals, whether it's through looking at grant opportunities or if there's, some extra money left over in a budget. And I think that sort of level of sensitivity and visibility is really helpful in building trust and communication among everybody who's involved in the library. And of course, it really scales up when you're thinking about the school district, but I think that it could be really helpful, as Nancy was saying, the board may not be able to honor all of the requests that come up and the ideas, but there could be a process in place for thinking about how those could be incorporated in future budgets or thought about in different ways, creatively through, the next year or two. And just so that it's really important that they are not just dismissed and kind of not the priorities of the school board and the administration for this current budget.
And to piggyback off that, Coco, I mean, I think especially when you have, a $1.4 million fund balance at the end of a fiscal year, and people are like, what, like you said, we didn't have the money, and all of a sudden you have the money. And I'm glad we have a fund balance and we're not on the other end having to go back to town to ask for more money. But that's a lot of money.
It is, and I've had conversations with teachers who've chatted with me and said, right now, given the realities of the COVID pandemic and the challenges kids are facing and families are facing, now is not the time to really build up that reserve fund. It's an important thing to have, but in the interest of, keeping staffing as robust as possible, now is really is the time of need. And so reflecting that in our budget and recognizing that, yes, building a reserve fund is a goal and it's important, but it's not a goal at the expense of the operating budget for the year and for the kids and the classrooms.
I'm going to put, this is all really helpful, and I'm going to put in the chat something that we developed with our work with Sue McCormick. And I know it was really helpful for me to go back and look at that original budget forum we did with her, because I think it was structured in a way that was designed to teach us, this group, how to make sure we did some of these really important things like incorporating folks' feedback, letting them know how it was incorporated, to continue to work on that trust building and rebuilding. And so this tool that she helped us put together came out of the community conversations we had in 2019, where we established these core values for our district. And I think we were, as of all the folks that participated, close to 400 people that participated over the course of that fall, pretty aligned that these were our top 8 to 10, I guess, values. And we revisited those several times over 2018, 2019 in our different processes. And they're also part of the facilities planning process. But I think keeping that at the forefront in any conversation we have is really important, giving folks a chance to. And I didn't look closely enough at the agenda from that budget forum in 2018, but I'm pretty sure we had folks kind of rate based on the budget, look at these values and weigh their priorities. So I think there's some really tangible ways for us to apply that learning to just remember again why it's so important and apply that learning to any input we get. And I think getting input on the budget is a way to do that. Or something else I was going to say about that. So I guess I just want to ask one more question around this before I move on. So it sounds like folks like the idea of getting input online, if we could find a way to do the thought exchange in time. And are people thinking that coupling that with an opportunity for folks to connect virtually in a forum is a good idea? Is that like not just the one or the other, but yeah, okay. Okay. All right, well, this is really helpful for us to share back to the board, and we'll keep you posted. And, one of the ways this group is really helpful is spreading the word. So we hope that you, if you're not a board member, that you would attend and encourage at least a handful of other folks to attend and to fill out any, input that we ask of you. Go ahead, Coco.
I was just wondering, Krista, if you could keep us posted about the ESSER 3 funds and what the plans are for the community engagement around that.
Yep, I made a note to do that. So I'm going to, as soon as I get information back, I'll be sure to let this group know.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're at 7:37 and I want to just take a moment to see what else folks on the communications end. We have a standing column in the Addison Independent. We've put out lots of bits and pieces of things in the past week or so, but we might want to think about putting something out, probably next, let's see, today's Tuesday. We might be able to get something out next week. We can be really nimble with our turnaround if we get good content. So anyway, but what we usually do is try to generate a couple of key points from this group and then ask board members who aren't here if they have other feedback. So if we were to put a column in the paper next week, what are some key things folks think we should be sure to include? Nancy.
Well, I think it would be really perfect timing to get information out to everyone about the Merger Study Committee virtual community meeting that's going to be held on the 16th of November. And I do think registration for that is required up front, and people need to know that. And I imagine the people who are organizing that forum or that meeting it would be really helpful to them to know how many people are going to attend virtually. Anything we could include in that about how it's going to be organized and the, sort of what the format's going to be. It's an hour and a half. So it would be great to be able to get that information out to people, I think.
I'm not sure if there's anybody in this group I don't think anybody here is serving on that committee. So I don't know much. I've been wondering what the format's going to be. I don't know if anybody knows, but we can definitely ask our reps to provide more detail.
I think that I don't know this for sure, but I think I heard that Sheila Sewell, the superintendent for Madison Northwest, is organizing it. So she might be a great source of information for that.
And I know just on that note, as far as getting students to participate, there have been a couple of different notes that have gone out to Mount Abe students to encourage them to join. So that's great. Okay.
I do hope, I must say, I do hope that there's ample time for people to provide input as well as time for people to get information in that forum.
Yep.
So my understanding is that it's going to be a small group. They're going to share information and then break out into breakout groups. And each member of the committee is going to be, somehow they're splitting up facilitating and note-taking. And so everybody will have a chance to address a certain number of questions, and it'll be all right if they don't get through all of the questions, for instance, in a certain group, because there will be a survey going out after where you could answer the rest of them, and a survey that will, if you weren't able to attend the meeting, that everybody will be able to do as well.
Thank you, Liz. Liz, do you know who on the Merger Study Committee? It sounds like Sheila, but is there anybody else who's helping to organize that I could reach out to get more info? Or maybe
their facilitator is helping. I forget the name.
Tracy.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But you could also reach out to the co-chairs.
The co-chairs. Okay.
It seems like also letting people know that that the board is looking for input on the budget process. Even if we don't have the thought exchange or whatever that's called in place, but showing the timeline for developing the budget and and letting the community know what the deadline is for providing feedback, with
Mhm.
hopes that we may have an opportunity and an easy way for them to do so. But it's certainly not too early to get it on people's radar, so they can start
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Would
That's
it
a good
would it
idea.
make sense to invite people to let people know that something that we're working on, the board's working on organizing something, but in the meantime, if people have thoughts about budget priorities, they should email the board?
I mean, I don't see why not. I'm trying to think of why there would be, I mean, any chance for folks to share their thoughts is helpful. It would be great if we had some guiding questions so it could be easy to digest, but maybe that doesn't matter. Yeah.
I
Well, I
just think doing that would help compensate for the fact that
It's late.
if we organize thought exchange,
Right.
you know, it's going to be late in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I think focusing on what is it that what kind of input is the board looking for?
Right.
And I think the board needs to decide what that is. You know, specifically, where would they like input, and you know, how can it be helpful
Yeah.
in shaping the
Right.
budget?
Okay.
My,
would
my,
also- Oh, go
my,
ahead,
my
Rob.
other thought, sorry, I should have raised my hand. I don't know if this is the appropriate place per se, but I also think optically, I think this week the district will probably get, unfortunately, some more negative press regarding incidents in our schools. And not to try to combat that, but to be upfront and honest and not brush that aside with like this, you know, update of all these other things going on. I think it's really important that we continually acknowledge that we're having struggles, and we you know, are open to feedback. We want, you know, this is a time where like a unified district, like it should work, right? Like when we're in, like this is how we need to, you know, bring each other up, hold each other up, help each other, pick each other up. And unfortunately, it seems like it's going the opposite direction. I feel there's more us versus them on so many levels than I have since I've been on the board. And that's a real bummer. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think we just need to acknowledge that we continue to face some really challenging situations in our schools. We don't have all the answers. I guess to have some humble pie there with it too. And that things are a work in process, but we ask, you know, that we work together and collaborate, not split apart and sort of divide, which is the feeling I have. We're continuing down the track, you know, even built on top of the whole facilities piece. Like this is a whole nother layer of an onion that I think we can't not have it in that piece, I guess, is my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I agree with what Rob is saying. In the specifics, I think the district is working on providing for the community, but it's the acknowledgement of the fact that it's a challenge that as Rob said, the community needs to come together to help solve it, and everybody is working together to do so. And Angela Lynn had a really great editorial 2 papers ago about exactly this, and it's important. I think that everybody in the community know that everybody takes this very seriously. They're very concerned about it, and that things are happening, and that it's not something that's getting brushed under the rug or swept aside. that it is a priority for the district, and it can be said as simply as that. And I think that that can go a long way. The other thing, I think that an update on the proposal process would be important, because I think most people are under the assumption that we're coming up at the end of the year and that the process is going to finish. But I think I saw in the update that it's pushed back to the end of January. So I think it's important to let the community know that where we are in that process, and then sort of what the next steps are.
I think that just brings up a question for me, and I've been thinking about it. Have there been identifiable next steps after Nate's report? I know this doesn't directly relate to the Addison Independent column, but it may be something that needs to kind of be on the radar as January approaches. It would feel like an incredible flop if there was just a presentation and then there was not a plan for what to do with the information and the feedback, or a timeline set for the board. I know Nate isn't, presenting one idea as a possible solution, but I do think it's something that should be under consideration for how that process is going to happen, versus kind of designing it as the information comes in from Nate.
No matter how many times anyone says Nate's not going to be providing a recommendation about what to do, everyone does expect Nate to provide a recommendation about what to do. So we can't, the more we emphasize that the board will still have plenty of work to do once they hear about Nate's evaluation of the proposals, that's an important message to get out. Now, we've given you, Krista, way more than one column can achieve, but some of this will, I'm sure, have to wait till another week. But that is a key piece about what's going to happen after the Levinson report.
Yeah, and as you were talking, Coco, I was just pulling up the original timeline, which has us getting the report from Nate's team in November. So now we know that's been pushed back. But the idea is that just to remind us all, obviously I had to pull it up to reminded myself that that the plan, at least up until that point, is that Nate and his team are going to share that draft report with the board, with principals, with proposal authors, and with the community input team. They're then going to revise their report based on any additional insights gained from those groups and present a final report to the board. And then we do need to really dig in and do our diligence with getting feedback. And I think this timeline includes providing multiple opportunities for public input. Really, one of the goals of this process is to find a way to make that feedback the most robust and valuable for the board. And so Nate's work is like getting us right up to that gate. And then I think the idea is that that feedback in that more robust way will give the board a much clearer sense of how to proceed. So I guess it doesn't fully say exactly what that's going to look like, but I think once we see that report, I think we'll have a better sense of how we're going to move forward. But yeah, this is great.
Krista, I had a question. I know this is going in another direction, but were we originally thinking like we would then have something on town meeting ballot? Because the 125, if that's when the report's finalized, we won't have enough time to warn something on meeting ballot. So that's out the window.
Yeah, and this I don't know that we as a board ever committed to putting anything on the ballot once we started this process with Nate.
I'm just thinking down because then if it goes to November, but if we had to put something on a ballot, let's say school closure or whatever, then that might be November, and that's going to be possibly the same time there is a merger vote. I'm watching these two trains come at each other even faster now.
Yeah, well, I think actually both of those are pushed off, right? So I think the merger study committee is not putting anything on this town meeting ballot. And we definitely, I don't think, have intentions to do that either. I think we've all been given some more breathing room. But just you even asking the question is a good reminder to all of us that we have to keep, and I think this is something Kim talks about a lot, just like keep reminding our community of that, how it's evolving and what it looks like right now. So yeah. So in all of this content, we'll see if we can weave in some of these key highlights. So before we move to final public comment, anything else folks have on this, please feel free to just shoot me an email, because I always appreciate hearing from people. And sometimes some of us need to process a little more before we can sound off on Zoom. So you have a couple of days on the column. That turnaround is a little quicker, but for any of the other things we discussed tonight, there's a little more time. And I just want to say thank you, all of you, for being here and for offering such really useful feedback. Is there anything else before we move to public comment that's on people's minds or that you just want to make sure to get out into the universe? Nancy.
I just want to say that you are such a great facilitator of this group.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I so appreciate your work. It's not an easy thing, I know. And I just think you're so good at it.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, this is a good group, and I really, really appreciate when it's a little smaller and we can be a little more flexible. Thanks to Allie for chiming in, and we're always happy to have people here, and to be a little more loose with our structure is really nice. So thanks. Okay, so just a couple of folks that have joined that are visitors. So if there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak that fits in that category, if you want to raise your Zoom hand and I'll call on you, or you can unmute yourself and just let us know your name and town and share whatever thoughts you have. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any comments, but please reach out after if anybody has anything that they want to get off their chest or, you know, out into someplace other than their own brain. All right, so we are ending 6 minutes early. Let the record show. Can I get a motion to adjourn at 7:54?
Rob, so move.
Okay, and a second?
I second Sandy.
All right. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 All right, thanks everyone. Have a great night, and yeah, keep on keeping on.